Thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode, delayed as it is, it's 8:37, in which I talk about issues related to public transportation and urbanism. And the reason I say "and urbanism" is that I'm going to talk about urban topologies. And I'm going to talk about something very theoretical, because what I'm talking about is the difference between bike and public transport-oriented urbanism. And the thing is, the main examples that I'm aware of bike cities are cities that still have trains, still have strong regional trains, for example. No, I've not changed to summertime with North America, because if I wanted to change to summertime with North America, I would be an hour early. Because the Americans right now, 1 p.m. their time would be not 7 p.m. or would not be 8 p.m. our time, it would be 6 p.m. our time. So actually, it's a little easier for me to do meetings with Americans this week, because we're 5 hours apart and not 6 hours. No, it's just that I had an errand to run, and then I just wrote a blog post about a completely different topic. Anyway, so the issue with this is that when I think of bike cities, I think of Dutch cities. Usually Amsterdam is the kind of most prototypical example, but as I understand Dutch urbanism, Amsterdam is not actually special. It's something that exists in all Dutch cities, and just Amsterdam is the one that tourists are most familiar with. But in Denmark, as I understand it, it's specifically Copenhagen. I don't think that the rest of Denmark is as bike-oriented. These are usually the cities that are most associated with cycling, at least outside their respective countries. And now I will point out that I've never lived in either of these cities. I've never even been to Copenhagen. So I'm going to talk about bike-oriented urbanism in a bit, but I'm also going to motivate why I'm going to talk about things that are kind of off-brand, let's call it, within bike urbanism. Whereas the cities that I've lived in are mostly transit cities, by which I mean Stockholm, Paris, and Berlin. Now, again, it's not a perfectly clean example, but when I say perfectly clean, I mean a place like Singapore or Hong Kong. I have lived in Singapore, but many years ago. Singapore and Hong Kong, I give them as examples because, first of all, they have atypically high transit model splits. Hong Kong plausibly has the highest mass transit model split in the world. It's declining as more people are getting cars, but it's still, I believe, the highest. Singapore is, I think, the second highest, and it's actually stable there. I think it goes Hong Kong, then Singapore, then Seoul, probably, then Tokyo. Maybe Tokyo, then Seoul, I'm not sure. But the point is that Singapore and Hong Kong don't really have urban cycling. I mean, maybe recreational cycling, but they treat cycling as a kind of private transport. And one of the points I would like to make is that cycling is actually private transport, in the same way that cars, for example, are private transport, in the same way that scooters are private transport. Now, of course, there are differences between bikes and cars. For example, bikes are smaller. For example, if you get hit by a bike, you hurt yourself. If you get hit by a car, unless the car is very slowed down due to traffic, you die. Bikes are less polluting, bikes take up less space. I'm not trying to impugn bikes as some kind of bad competition with mass transit or anything like that, but it's a form of transportation that you own. And we're going to get to that in a second. By the way, a form of transportation that you own, but I do want to make one important difference between bikes and cars while we're at it. Talking about that you own part. A car is a form of transportation that you own and will show off your wealth, because cars are expensive. And so you can show how wealthy you are by, for example, getting a very expensive car. And then you expect other people to treat you like you're better than them on the road. And this is something that you can very rarely do on a train. If you ride first class, there are certain stereotypes of people who ride first class on intercity trains in Germany, but not on urban transit. By far the dominant kind of rail transport. On a bike, you can't do that. So even though a bike is a consumer item, you buy the bike. You choose a brand. You often identify with the brand, and you think it is an extension of your identity. It's not actually expensive. The bike, I mean, yes, you can have an expensive bike, but my understanding is that really expensive bikes cost a couple $1,000s or something like that. And maybe at this point they're even going to have an electric assist. Owning a bike, yeah, okay, sure, but that's royal trains. Okay, I don't mean if you're King Charles. I mean if you're a schlub in like the 97th income percentile, who who feels oppressed at work because they have a boss and they have to attend boring meetings and they think they will do the boss's job better than the boss can. Often they're correct, and they choose to take it out on service staff. I mean like that kind of wealthy. I don't mean King Charles, or I don't remember the name of them. Is Willem-Alexander the name of the current monarchy of the Netherlands? I do not remember my European monarchs. Yeah, Willem-Alexander. Yeah, you can do, yes, you can have status bike manufacturers, but often the way you customize, often the way you show off status with a bike is very different. Because again, I mean, high-end bikes cost, what is it, a few $1,000s. Like, never mind that on my current income I could afford, on freelancer income I could afford that. I mean, I didn't, but I didn't buy that. I lived in Paris and rode the metro in the RER, but I could afford that. I couldn't afford a car, certainly a good car, on freelancer income in 2017. So, so what bikes do show is they show taste. Often they could show that, oh, I ride a bike, I'm healthier than you, or something like that. It's a little bit like the joke about how you can tell someone is vegan. You don't need to, they will tell you. Or can you tell that someone has run a marathon? You don't, they will tell you. It's a little bit like that. So in that sense, bikes are a little more like private transport, but it's not private transport that lets you show off wealth, and this is really important. It's a consumer good. You choose it. Often you choose it as something that says something about you, but at the end of the day, it's a consumer good in the sense that a smartphone is a consumer good, or that a laptop is a consumer good. Like, I'm sure it says something about me that I tried once in my life not to buy a ThinkPad, and then went back to ThinkPad afterward, and I'm on like my fourth ThinkPad, and my computer, as everyone who watches the stream knows, is ancient, and I need a new computer, and I would prefer to buy something that's not Chinese. Like, I'm sure it says something about me, but it's not going to show off anything special, when at the end of the day, a laptop costs what, 1,000? 1,500? And it's a purchase that I do every couple of years. Like, that's not status. That's not a status symbol. Yeah, but I don't own a car. That's the point. I don't own a car. And when I walk on the street, I mean, even if I had like the highest end new iPhone, it's not like it would be very visible. And so the bike is private transport, but it lacks this kind of, I show off that I am richer than you through its ownership aspect that you have with cars. And this is really important because there are people who think that they're better than you for being richer than you, for showing that they're richer than you, and that the state needs to support that. This is a lot of pro-car activism. Essentially, it's people who think that the state needs to subsidize and incentivize very conspicuous consumption so that they can show off that they're better. Again, bikes just don't have it. Bikes, do they involve some kind of status competition? Yeah, but not anywhere on that scale. No. So, but it does matter that bikes are private transport. You take them wherever you want. I mean, let's qualify that. Okay, so with a car you can get anywhere, right? I mean, if you have a car, you can drive everywhere. So if I have let's say I own a car. Okay, I live in Berlin, Mitte. I want to go on a trip. I can take my, let's say I have a car and they also know how to drive it, which I don't. I can take the car from my building, which does have parking, and drive anywhere I want. I want to go to some kind of resort on the Baltic. Yeah, I can go to any of these. I can go anywhere, right? I can go anywhere with a car. For example, can I go into, I don't know, Alexanderplatz with a car? I mean, this is mostly pedestrian. Maybe there's parking. I don't actually know if there's parking. In New York, there would not be parking. In Paris, I don't actually know. Like, I can't tell you if there's parking in any of the cities that I've lived in because I didn't own a car, so I can't tell you where the parking lots are. I know in New York they don't because it's very conspicuous that there's a shortage of parking in New York, and so the parking lots are horrifically expensive. But, I mean, okay, so you can take the car anywhere, provided it's not completely jammed, provided you have parking, provided it's paved, for example. I mean, yeah, you can take the car anywhere, go try driving, go drive your car in, I don't know, Freetown. Maybe not in Freetown itself, but like anywhere in Liberia that's not. And by Liberia, I mean Sierra Leone because Liberia is Monrovia and Sierra Leone is Freetown, and I'm pretty sure they're both not especially paved outside the capital. So the roads need to be paved. They need to be at least somewhat usable, safe, that you don't get jacked at an intersection, which maybe is trivial if you live in Germany or the US or the Netherlands, but not in Mexico, for example. And again, there needs to be parking. Like, there needs to be a supportive infrastructure. And the same with bike. Like, in theory, you can go anywhere. Now, in theory is important because obviously in a place like the Netherlands, there is going to be a lot of supportive infrastructure, but this needs to be built. So I want to make it very clear that the private transport gives you the appearance that you can go anywhere. You're not dependent on a schedule. You're not dependent on connections, on stations. You mean things like bike share systems? Bike share systems, or it's like car share. That's still private transport. But yeah, this does introduce an element of, where are the stops? And of course, you can't quite go anywhere because, for example, maybe, actually I don't know about off the feet, but certainly the system that I'm most familiar with, and to be very clear, I've used bike share once in my life. It was in Boston. I had to ride behind someone else, and I was scared most of the way because I was riding on roads that had bike lanes, but only in theory. So that's not the system I'm most familiar with. The system I'm most familiar with is the Parisian one because, I lived there. I constantly saw all the places. You can't go on an outing with it, right? Because, I mean, because you have to drop off the bike in the city. So yeah, you can maybe go on an outing to a park in the city or near the city, but you can't decide to go on to spend 6 hours or something riding your bike as kind of a half exercise, half recreation trip to somewhere that's, I don't know, 100 or something kilometers away. That you cannot do. But on the other hand, I mean, you basically never do that with a bike that you own anyway. That's the whole point. It's the same thing with a car. In theory, with a car you go anywhere, but in practice, first of all, the thickest trips they want to take with a car, you can't because of congestion, right? I mean, again, less relevant to me, maybe because I already live in Meta, but let's say that I don't live in Meta. Let's say that I live where I used to live, which is Neukölln. Okay, let's say I live in Neukölln, and with a car I can go anywhere, and this motorway is, you see this? This is a motorway under construction. SPD headed a GroKo in the early 2010s instead of doing red-green because the Greens said they wouldn't join the coalition unless the sphere was scrapped. SPD threw them out for one administration, and now SPD is planning to crawl into a CDU coalition for a lot of reasons, most of which are petty, but one likely consequence is they're going to keep building it, I think, until about here, which the Greens said no to. So let's say, this has already been built. Let's say I live in Neukölln and I own a car. Yeah, I can take the car here. It's fine. I can take the car or I don't even need to use the Autobahn. I can take the car, but where do I want to go? I probably want to go somewhere in city center. And guess what? Other people also want to go to city center. There's congestion. Maybe it's not a literal bumper to bumper kind of traffic jam, but the speed on the streets in Berlin is not high. Even if you're in a car, even if you're not on a bus or something. So yeah, in theory you can get the car anywhere, but you can't take it on the thickest markets because they're congested. You can take it on the thinner markets because at this point in the 21st century, in a developed country, all of the roads are paved. So it's not going to be like, again, trying to be in Sierra Leone outside Freetown where you're on unpaved roads and this is to the point that it's an actual huge impediment to development that nothing can get there. I mean, they can get there, but you have a car that's going to go with bicycles. And so you can take it on the thinner markets, but usually you don't go on the thinner markets. That's why there are thin markets. So you take it in what's called the middle markets. And again, I'm talking about cars right now. And I'm going to go on an even bigger tangent and point out that middle markets are also something very useful for thinking about air travel. Just because I keep saying things like high-speed rail is the intercity equivalent of urban rail or mass transport, so public transport. So the example is, so on the thickest market, let's call them Berlin to Munich, there's a high-speed train. Sometimes even on the thickest international market, we have high-speed trains that might even be usable, if expensive, things like Paris to Amsterdam. Generally, if you're within high-speed rail range of Paris, then it's a thick market, and you have high-speed rail there. So that's a thick market, and yeah, people can still fly, but kind of why would you? And then on very thin markets, okay, I'm just going to make up random European cities, like let's say, I don't know, Basel to Bordeaux. I doubt there are going to be direct flights. I'm going to look because I don't want to get into that rabbit hole too much, or I don't know. I'm specifically doing secondary to secondary cities like Hanover to Salzburg, things like that. Salzburg, Hanover. Hanover to, I don't know, Brescia. Actually, Hanover to Brescia you might be able to fly because Brescia, I don't remember if it's in Brescia, I think Bergamo, like one of the nominally Milan airports is like halfway, Bergamo is halfway to Brescia, and I think it's a popular low-cost hub for people flying to Milan. So yeah, maybe Brescia because it's close to, but that's because you're close to Milan. And if it were something that's not close to an actually big thing, then you'd be stuck again, like to, I don't know, Firenze. Firenze is a huge tourist market. I visited when I lived in Stockholm. It was not a direct flight. I forget where I changed. I want to say it's Italy. So note that even like Stockholm to Firenze was not a direct flight. So the direct flights are there's these middle markets. Of course, they can be very thick if they're beyond high-speed rail range. Like, I mean, London to New York is a very thick market. That's an airplane market by virtue of the fact that there's an ocean. Or New York to LA, I mean, not an ocean, but the entire United States. And with sincere apologies to Alaska, to Hawaii, to San Diego, and to Seattle, and to maybe Florida that I'm vaguely excluded them. No apologies offered, of course, to Boston. But so planes, but within a range where trains could be an alternative, planes thrive on those middle markets. Those markets where that are not strong enough for trains, but are also not so weak that who the hell would fill a direct plane. And this is kind of where you drive. Now, bikes, it's kind of complicated. Bikes, again, they're private transport. Once the system is set up, you can go anywhere. But, first of all, the system needs to be set up. And we're not talking about the Netherlands right now, so it's not going to be a nationally connected system. I don't even bike in Berlin. I know a lot of people who bike in Berlin because my social circle does not entirely live within the ring, but disproportionately lives within the ring. And so if you, and I'm going to get to the issue of distance in a sec. So there is a lot of, you can go, let's say, anywhere within the ring to anywhere within the ring or something like that, or or of course cross the ring. The ring's not a hard limit, but I mean something like if you live in, and I'm going to mention eastern, not western neighborhoods because cyclists, drivers, cyclists, drivers, kind of, and emphasize kind of. The stereotype is correct, but it's not. But there are exceptions. So let's say you live in Penslava back, yeah, you can bike to Weisensee or something. Like it's not like you can't bike past the ring. So, so first of all, but the point is that the bikes are very blobby, and by blobby, what I mean is that once the streets are there with bike lanes, you're gonna bike, and essentially you travel at a constant speed. It's like driving. Now, constant has a lot of asterisks, right? Like I keep saying, you drive. So I analogize bikes to cars this way. Now, driving obviously is not at a perfectly constant speed, right? Because, for example, on motorways, you are faster than on an arterial road. On an arterial road, you're faster than on a side street. And this does change urban geography based on the availability of such crossing. So again, if I'm in Neukölln and I'm driving, I imagine it's easier for me to drive on A100 and be in, I don't know, Schöneberg, or I don't know if this, I would call this Charlottenburg, maybe. Go to the convention center here for Antoine's or something. Then it would be for me to travel the same amount of distance where no motorways presently exist, like if I want to go north or something, or northeast. But I would argue that even with the motor, so first of all, bikes don't have motorways, and second, even with the motorway issue, I don't think cars have. I still think cars are blobby, or like traveling at a much more constant speeds than constant speed on speeds than does public transportation, because public transportation has such strong issue of where are you going. It's not just where you're starting, but also where you're going. Public transportation is designed around very thick markets, and then it reshapes the city to reinforce these thick markets. So in a city like my own, Berlin, how does this work? We have a very strong mass transit network inherited from the early 20th century, with certain reinforcements from the Cold War era that were designed to get people to the new city center of West Berlin, the zoo, as opposed to the historic city center, which is Mitte. And so what does this mean? It means that, first of all, destinations within the city are likely to be in city center, which is, again, historically Mitte, but Berlin is not at all monocentric unless you define almost the entirety of the city within the ring as a center. So there are a lot of centers, like a lot of places in Mitte, Alexanderplatz, Potsdamer Platz, and so on. At this point, Friedrichshain around Warschauer Straße is a center. The Amazon Tower is here. City West is still a big thing, the zoo. We have the convention center here. It's a lot of things. It's a lot of it's a lot of sub-centers, and but your destination, unless you're doing something very local or extremely specialized, or something that's both. So no, usually specialized things go in a center, but let's say something that's both very specialized and niche and also cannot afford city center. For example, I visited a hackerspace that is underground enough, I guess, that they couldn't afford, let's say, Friedrichshain or Neukölln or Kreuzberg, and so went into Lichtenberg. Or places where you buy ethnic groceries, and I don't mean, so maybe there are some in Neukölln for let's say Middle Eastern, but from what I've been told, let's say if you're trying to buy specialized ingredients for Indian cuisine or Chinese cuisine, neither of which is that mainstream here, then it would be in shopping centers that are outside the ring. But that is unusual. That's why they're outside the ring. But so for the most part, the destination is going to be in the center, because this is how public transport rolls. Because if I'm on public transport, let's say again, let's start again from my old apartment, which was around here, Neukölln. So first of all, there's the issue of the fact that I needed to walk to the train, and of course the walking part is much slower than the train. And that does change urbanism profoundly. I'm going to get to that in a moment. But but even from there, let's hand wave. Let's say that I lived right on top of Neukölln Südring, the station, not Südring. And if I go from here, it's much faster, very much easier to go along the line. So this is along the ring or along U7. This being U7. And yeah, I can change trains, but every change of trains slows me down. I need to change platforms. I need to wait for the connecting train. And if it's something if I'm going to a randomly selected station, even if I'm on the ring, which is a very good circumferential in Berlin, even then it's often multiple changes, and so that slows me down. So my effective average speed is just nowhere near the speed of the S-Bahn, which is about, on the ring I think the ring isn't usually slow, it's like 36 kilometers an hour on average, but the S-Bahn is mostly 40 kilometers an hour, or the U-Bahn, which is 28. That's not my effective average speed if I'm changing trains, let alone if I'm walking, from my old apartment to the station, and then from the station to my ultimate destination. So in this way, I keep saying that urban rail is spiky, and then private transport, and this by the way includes your feet. Pedestrian cities are not spiky. Pedestrian cities favor uniform density, and this is why traditional urban forms are rather uniform in density, and this includes not quite every, but nearly every Western European city. Like look at Berlin, okay? So at the time, there's something in the history of Berlin called the Wilhelmine Ring. But when I say ring, I don't mean like railway or some kind of piece of environment, but I mean like something like a very thick annulus, which is roughly, and it's called ring because it's not the very center of Berlin, which is older. It's the parts of the city that developed during like Emperor Wilhelm. I think both Emperor Wilhelm's tenures. So it's a thick ring of neighborhood that's roughly this ring. So it's kind of like within like maybe a kilometer or two within the ring. Let's zoom in on Neukölln, for example. It's one of these more traditional neighborhoods. Traditional, I should say, not in valleys, but in urban form. The valleys of Neukölln are all traditional. And so, first of all, you can see these kind of Berlin courtyards with like the multiple courtyards behind the buildings, but also, these buildings are all practically the same height. Usually 6 to 7 floors. Why? Because there's no real difference if you're commuting on your feet. And this is all late 19th century, maybe early 20th. So before the train got here, the train only gets, this train and this train are both 1920s. I think this is 28 maybe is when this is developed. Maybe I think maybe this station is from 1930 actually. So this is late Weimar. So this area has already been mostly developed by then. And so it was not designed around public transport. Public transport got there, but it was designed around maybe streetcars. Berlin had a very, I think Berlin might have had the world's largest streetcar system. But streetcars make so many stops, especially traditionally, that they don't differ that much from private transport. I mean, they're corridor based maybe. They're not at all spiky. And so again, buildings are all mostly the same height. Destinations follow drags. So when I say drags, I mean these main streets of Neukölln. So Sonnenallee, what is it called, Marktstraße and Hermannstraße. And yeah, maybe a few things off of them, like a little commerce on Echelstraße, whatever. But it's not spiky. Like I don't recall. I mean, you can maybe, if you walk very carefully, you can maybe see a little bit more development near the stations than away from them. But it's not that big a deal where the stations are. And essentially, this is because, to a large extent, the U-Bahn fit into the pre-existing traditional city. So and yeah, there are still. I mean, it's not perfectly uniform. I mean, yeah, Hermannplatz is way more important than random stops. And yet, um, if you look at things that are newer and have been developed entirely around the train, and here I'm gonna go to cities that I've lived in. So I'm not gonna talk about. I mean, I've lived in Singapore. I'm not gonna talk about Tokyo or Hong Kong or something, or even about again Singapore, or even, I can show you maybe Vancouver actually, but Stockholm is actually a really good example of this. So Stockholm has the old city core. It's a traditional kind of developed before the train type system, rather uniform density, and then they built 5 skyscrapers in city center, the Hotoriet towers, these ones. They're a quintuplet of skyscrapers. I'm just going to zoom in just to show you how butt ugly they are. So it's kind of a European thing where when you build skyscrapers, they're ugly, and then because they're ugly, you stop building them, and then you build them in the suburbs, and then you wonder why high-end jobs sometimes don't stay in city center, and why you have jobs sprawl. But let's look at the areas that were developed around the train, the T-bana. So it's called string of pearls because, again, trains are spiky. The station itself matters. This is not a bike city at all. Can you bike in Stockholm? Absolutely. I mean, bike model split there is pretty high, but it's a transit city first, Stockholm. And so you can actually sometimes figure out the exact locations of the T-bana stations just by seeing where the development is the most intense. So, for example, so we could literally just go stop by stop on the Green Line or something, where you can kind of see that here, for example, in Narvik. So first of all, you have all these, you have all this modernist housing, and it's mostly near the train station. I mean, not entirely, but it's oriented toward the train station. You can see lower density or even undeveloped areas far from the train station. Here, for example, it's lower density, and the whole point is that the center, and you might say there's more actual center type development at the train station, and this is also in what I think is the most appreciated of these developments, mostly because it's old enough that it was before the Million program, which is Vällingby. That was when they pretended they would be independent cities and not bedroom communities. So in Vällingby, Vällingby, it's short vowel. It's no different from an E. So you literally see the kind of center development just around the train station. So and again, it's modernist development. So big plaza, shopping, taller buildings right next to it, and then as you go farther away, you get buildings that are still multi-story but are not as tall. These look like 4 floors maybe, and of course they're oriented toward the train station. So the most important thing is that you have, for example, a street network that's oriented towards serving the train station, and you have taller buildings that are on these streets, because the whole point is for people to be able to get to the neighborhood center, which is co-located with the train station, because this neighborhood was developed simultaneously with the construction of the Green Line in the 50s. So this is what I mean by spiky development. Now, this is a very modernist example that's very kind of tower in the park, just because essentially this spikiness was only figured out relatively recently. This is a 1950 example, and I doubt there are things that are significantly older than that. So let's look at things that are newer than that, because is there a particular theory that I'm aware of that explains why New York was fine demolishing uniform walking density while EU cities were not? I disagree with your statement that New York demolished its uniform walking density while EU cities were not. Before we go to before I show you Vancouver, let me show you Berlin again. I specifically chose Neukölln as a neighborhood that was not urban renewed. So let's look at other parts of Berlin that were, because we absolutely have had Plattenbauen. So first of all, this is not demolition, but I just want to show you guys an example of how even in Berlin, I keep kind of setting it up as a transit city that's maybe old enough that it would be uniform, but that's not all of Berlin. There are newer parts of it. And I think the most beloved would be Gropiusstadt. So again, Tower in the Park, designed by Gropius, so it's actually pretty. And it's not just that it's pretty, it's that there are town centers within this area that are oriented toward the train station. So taller buildings all over, but maybe especially tall near the train station, with community centers. This is, so Lipschitzallee is the one where I think this is a supermarket that has rather good Middle Eastern options. I think this is a library, or part of it is a library. This is a bunch of local offices, like I think a local SPD politician is based here. And plus, again, some additional local retail, small shops, not just a big supermarket. So so again, town center at this plaza. It's good urbanism. I've been there. I think I tweeted it once. I think it tweet stormed it once. It would have been fall of 2020. Tall buildings that are not strewn haphazardly, but are specifically designed to be near the train stations. No, this is not demolition, this is new, but yeah, there was also demolition in Berlin, thank you very much. Now, of course, East Berlin did a lot of it. Now, when I say demolition in Berlin, bear in mind that the demolition in Berlin mostly happened in 1944 and 1945 due to some tragic history that Germany had with certain chemicals. Also tragic history with Hitler thinking that if the Red Army could barely and only technically win a war with Finland, then the Wehrmacht would walk all over it. But anyway, so a lot of the demolition, so in Berlin, this demolition would have been wartime, and then often the rebuilding was different because, first of all, modernism, and second of all, I kept talking to you before about the courtyards. So Neukölln, again, is a neighborhood that was not urban renewed, and in the east it would have been Prenzlauer Berg. So we had all these internal courtyards. So nice apartment, shitty apartment, shitty apartment. People didn't like living in these internal courtyards, especially if the apartments were not one window to the street, one window inside, but were entirely inside, like apartments here in the wings. These were really unpopular, and a lot of them were just demolished because they were not viewed as desirable at the time. I shouldn't say viewed as desirable is inherently a point of view. They were not desirable at the time. Again, some neighborhoods didn't have that. Like in the east, Prenzlauer Berg was like, you can see all these courtyards; they're still intact. There are some buildings where you need to walk through a series of courtyards just to get to where you're going, and then you have much more urban renewed Friedrichshain, which was supposed to be kind of the center of East Berlin, and the main street of it was called Stalinallee, just to showcase that it was the main street of East Berlin. And then they realized, oh shit, no, we don't like Stalin anymore, and they changed it to Karl Marx-Allee. So here the internal courtyards would have been demolished, but also in West Berlin, same thing. Quite a lot of Kreuzberg, for example, is stuff that was rebuilt modernist. So no, it's not a particular. I don't need to explain this because this literally didn't happen. New York. I mean, I'm not saying every European city did that, but Berlin did. Often the places that didn't do it were places that were not invested in, I will say. Which could be either Boone or Bain, depending, or often both. But anyway, I want to talk more about the spiky transit density before talking back to bikes. So here's the Vancouver example. Now in Vancouver, it's not 1950s, 60s, early 70s modernism. It's later than that because SkyTrain only opened in 85, 86. I believe the technically opened 85, but open for real for normal revenue service beginning of 86. So in Vancouver, first of all, there's kind of the traditional city. Let's pick a completely random area and hope that I'm not completely misrepresenting its history. I have never been to this block, for the record. I'm just zooming in, and so it's an American style grid, a North American style grid. The Canadians don't like it when you remind them that they're basically descendants of Americans who chose to stay loyal to the crown. I mean, sometimes, but they don't like being reminded they're basically the same as Americans in many ways. Grid, internal streets. This is a hierarchy, so this is not. So this is a grid where you do see interruptions on the local streets. They're not. They're often not continuous. Farther north, it's older and more continuous, and basically the same kind of density. It looks single family. Some of these are, some of these aren't. A lot of these have accessory dwelling units, these granny flats, where behind you build another house that is supposed to be for your in-laws or for your elderly parents, or for someone or for a student renter or several student renters. And again, we can even look again in a much more urban place, like near where I lived. It's around here, and it's essentially the same kind of thing because SkyTrain doesn't come here. And maybe not, the buildings aren't literally all the same height because it's maybe more recent, so it's a question, here we read this lot has been redeveloped, it has not, so we see some variation in that, but it's not static. It's pretty haphazard. And then there's SkyTrain, and I'm going to skip the Canada line because it's not as TOD, and we're going to look to the most TOD of the lines, the oldest and most successful, the Expo line. And this is how the density looks. This is still, to some extent, towers in the park, but often it isn't. Often it's something that would be called a New York Towers in a base. So they make sure that you have a kind of ground floor from sidewalk level that looks somewhat traditional, like here. There's a ground floor, and yeah, there's a little bit of a setback, but it's not. I would not call this a tower in a park in any way, shape, or form. This is, in New York, the term for this is tower on a base. Often, so here it looks maybe like the tower was built separately from this. In a New York style tower on a base is that this would have been a single project and then the tower is in its center. And here maybe there's even a plaza because it's organic. And again, in New York it would be base and then tower. This is, again, there are people who just think that high-rise buildings are morally offensive or something, but this is good density. Okay, and it's not. I mean, some people here drive. I'm sure there's parking here. I think one of these census tracts, and I never remember which one, because I have not memorized Canadian census tracts because my level of autism, I mean, it's there, but it's not as extensive, maybe, if that makes sense. And so but one of these is, I think, Canada's highest model split, or maybe it's Metro Vancouver's highest model split and Canada's second highest model split census tract, where the number one would be somewhere in Toronto. So people here do take the train. This is also a giant retail center and to some extent job center, Metrotown. They literally named this neighborhood as "This is City Center." This is all from the 1980s. This was built simultaneously with the train. And the same is true of, let's say, New West. Here, a lot of the high rises were built while I think the oldest of the high rises were built while the train was under construction. I think maybe these or something, and then. But again, because it's a rebuild rather than a suburb that was undeveloped, it's more tower on a base than tower in a park. So the stuff that's not the towers is not empty, it's just, I don't know, things like this that were just not rebuilt taller or something like that. And so this is spiky. Okay, I mean, this is the density at New Westminster. This density does not exist half a kilometer from New West, and the density that exists half a kilometer from New West does not exist at a random spot. This is a rail-oriented city. If you're thinking of a rail-oriented city that does not look like this, then either it's a place that's built very little housing since then, like New York, or most likely you're thinking of Paris, which absolutely does look like what I just described, just not the city proper, but the suburbs. So what I would say is get out of the tourist ghetto, because Paris absolutely is spiky. Again, not maybe city center, but let's go on the to not past Vincent. Yeah, this is very much a center around around the intersection, around the new RER stop, Val de Fontenay, not de Val de Fontenay. This is so this entire branch of the RER is new. This is not a historic commuter line. This is a branch that was built in the 70s and opened to Noisy the same day that the through section opened through Les Halles. So all of this is new, often in tunnel. So they made sure to build on top of that as their kind of is kind of like town center style strategy. So it would be here, it would be Noisy, where you can just I mean, often the train is visible above ground, but if it weren't, you could still, like here, it's not. I can kind of tell you where the train goes. The train is here. And I know this because I'm literally seeing where the center of Noisy-le-Grand is. It's here. It's not here. And then it keeps going until you hit the easternmost of these centers, which if you've been a tourist in Paris, you have likely visited, because it's of course Disneyland, part of a growth plan. They didn't put it there randomly. They put it there around. I think it opened around the same time that both the was extended here and the TGV line here, the bypasses Paris, opened. Likewise in the west, I mean, Paris is not just the east, also the west. I sometimes need to remind myself. But Cergy, yeah, train, no train, train, no train. So this is spiky urban density. Now, bikes are different, and this matters for the scale. And remember how I said that the examples I'm going to give you are going to be off-brand? Well, there's a reason. So, Copenhagen, if you try to look at it closely, or if you know something about its urban history, you might notice that there is a little bit of spikiness there too. I mean, traditional city center, same as in Paris or Berlin, or Stockholm. I don't know if no skyscrapers or very few skyscrapers. I've not, again, I'm talking about a city that I've done some Google Earth tourism in, but don't know especially, but I've never been to. And then you can see how it grades into suburbia. And you might notice something, or if you know something about the urban history, you already know it's called the finger plan. So you see that there's this suburban line, S-Tog, named after German S-Bahn. Buildings, no buildings. Buildings, no buildings. No buildings. Buildings. And this is, okay, now another line, buildings. Not as many buildings. Oh, and here there's another line, buildings. No buildings. Buildings. Here there's a little branch, buildings. This is called the finger plan. This is not random. So this is an example of, so here you see spikiness in Copenhagen, and you think, oh wait, bike city. Well, no. This was designed specifically with the trains. This is well before Copenhagen became a model bike city, which is very recent as I understand it. Like my understanding is that Copenhagen has been imitating Amsterdam, and now Dutch cities only consciously became bike cities in the 70s. So in the 19, so a little bit of history, of which there are people who are much more informed on this than me. So if you're a random viewer on Twitch, on YouTube, kindly do not cite me. There are better people to cite. I think on the in the vlogging world, it's not just bikes. Maybe the person who will most likely know the best about this, but I don't know. So in the 70s, people in the Netherlands perceive cycling as a Southern European thing, mainly Italy. Because at the time there was no such thing as bike infrastructure. If you've been a tourist in an Italian city center with narrow streets, you know that these are narrow streets that you would think are not very car friendly, and somehow they're car dominated, and and the sidewalk is maybe a meter in the historic parts of Firenze. What's a bike lane? So to the extent people are, so yeah, I mean, tourists walk because it's all in the historic city center, and you're a tourist, you're not bringing your own car. If you're local, most likely you're driving. The public transport network in Firenze is not that great. In Bologna, I think it's better. On the other hand, my main source on this kind of Central Italian public transport would be Marco Chitti, who has opinions about Toscana. So, but I believe what I said is still true, even with Marco's Emiliano biases. And so so there was a lot of cycling in Italy in the 70s, because Italy in the 70s was not a rich country. I mean, it was getting there, but kind of the peak of Italy as like a real first world country would be 1980s and 90s. In the 70s, it was still converging to some extent. And in the last 20 to 25 years, it's unfortunately been diverging. But especially intensively in the last 15 years since the Great Recession. But so people in the Netherlands perceived cycling as something that you do if you're poor. Maybe they didn't consciously think of it that way, but they said, "Oh, it works in Italy, but it can't work here because in Italy it's warm, and here in the Netherlands we have cold winters." And this is something they bring up for some people who think that people cycle in the Netherlands and Copenhagen because they have very mild summers, and we can't do it in the in very hot summer places. Well, in the 70s, 80s, people said the exact opposite. So anyway, Amsterdam, in Dutch cities in general, start doing bike infrastructure, leading to death threats from drivers who view it as a personal threat to their status or something. But this happened anyway, and so this became a national network over time, and Copenhagen imitated that. And as I said, I'm going to go off-brand, and the reason I'm going off-brand is that in Copenhagen, this is a very recent thing, the amount of cycling. Oh, Athens, yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, not just your mother. It's actually really common for, even if in places that don't have perfect cycling is very common for school, and I'm going to get into that, I promise. And this is also true for school, not just uni. So school and uni, I think, are the strongest kind of trip for cycling in a multi-model city. Let's call this multi-model city Berlin, just because in Germany I can tell you what the data is by purpose of trip, but I'm certain it's true in France, Sweden, the Netherlands. And the point is that in Copenhagen, a lot of this development on the finger plan is from when the city had the S-Tog and no other form of of at least grade separated rail transport. So they essentially suburbanized along these lines on the finger plan. In contrast with, let's say, the London model of you just have a green belt and you don't build in the green belt, so you kind of don't build enough housing. Or I mean, you could do it and still build in the city, but London didn't. Whereas, for example, Toronto has a green belt but does build within the green belt. And Vancouver, I don't know if Vancouver has a formal green belt, but Vancouver can't build really beyond its boundaries because, let me just go back to Vancouver for a sec. I did just blog about this, so certain things that people say about development irritate me. It's called No, the Anglosphere is not uniquely NIMBY, or unusually NIMBY. Vancouver, I don't know if Vancouver set up a green belt, but let's look. To the north, this is what you would be building on. To the west, water. To the south, America. And yeah, to the east you can sprawl, but at this point the sprawl has reached as far as Langley, so yeah, you can keep sprawling, but you're getting really far from a city center that is not in the center. This is city center. This is the Langley. Yeah, I mean, people are talking about moving regional functions to Burnaby and Surrey to make it easier for things to sprawl to Mission and Abbotsford, but I mean, at the end of the day, the center is still Vancouver, I'm sorry. So in Vancouver, in practice, they have development limits, and this is plausibly the highest housing production per capita major metropolitan area in the developed world. I think Seoul might be a little bit ahead. I think Seoul is 11 per 1,000 people, and Metro Vancouver is 10. And this is year in, year out. So you can build within the Greenbelt, London doesn't. Copenhagen did the thing, which again I should do a little bit in Paris, it's just less systematic there, where it's still contiguous urban sprawl, it's just that it's green when there's no rail, grey when there is rail, and this is long before Copenhagen became the cycling city that it is. So this is something you really need to think in terms of smaller cities. So what do I mean by smaller cities? I mean, often it's university towns, like I think in Belgium, at least the place where I heard the most about people cycling, is not in Brussels. It's, I think I've heard the most in Ghent, because Ghent is much smaller university. So so often if there's a university that's a disproportionate share of the city, and I say disproportionate share because yes, you can. I mean, I'm pretty sure the biggest university town in Europe is Paris. In fact, Paris might have been Europe's biggest university town continuously since more or less the medieval university was invented. So, but Paris has everything. Ghent is I think much more uni-specialized, and so so often it's something that's short range because, as I said, your speed on a bikes are blobby. You go anywhere. Yeah, you can bike faster if it's like a nice straight road with good cycle facilities. But the difference between your speed there and when you're leaving your apartment is a lot smaller than my difference in speed between when I'm leaving my apartment and when I get on the train at wherever. This is also. So this, but the flip side, not the flip side, the flip side is that bikes have a much narrower range, much shorter range. I shouldn't say narrower, shorter range. On the train, the thing is, because it's the last half a kilometer that's the most annoying because you do it on foot, which is why the most desirable development is near the station, so you don't have the annoying last half kilometer, even full kilometer. But once you get on the train, you can go wherever within the system. But I mean, okay, so the upshot is that the belief within Berlin is that the distance between any 2 points within the ring, on or within the ring, is half an hour, because at the end of the day, there's a little bit of walk time at both ends, and often you're changing trains, so there's a change train time, but the amount of time you're spending on a moving train is kind of immaterial at that scale, so it's half an hour. It's not literally true, but it's also not true, if that makes sense. And the point is that if you're going outside the city, I shouldn't say outside the city, like city centers in Darcy. If you go outside city center, you're going to, I don't know, Lichtenberg, you're going way east. Like maybe I want to walk through a park. And by maybe I mean I literally did that just because, like, I think I did it here on Fledersagen. I mean, it wasn't that long of a trek because once I get on S3, I just go. So okay, instead of 30 minutes, this is 45, but it's 45 minutes that are, I don't know, from the forest to not also not from my apartment. That's that's a speed that you can probably do on a bike, but it's strained and you need the streets to get you there exactly, and often they don't. Or often, or to Teufelsberg, which is here, I think. It's like half. I mean, it's a lot of walking, so it's maybe more than half an hour, but the walking is part of the trip, I would say. So it's you're starting to even within Berlin and things that are not Wannsee, things that are still like close to the ring, are still speeds that where the train beats the bike. And then you go to a place like, and then let's say you go to Wannsee. With Wannsee, the train will handily beat the bike, and this is even though the main thing to do in Wannsee is not to stare at the train station, which is completely, it's a normal, boring train station. What you actually go to in Wannsee is what I found to be Germany's only actually good Holocaust museum. Which is not even like near the train station, so you walk a lot, and even then, I'm pretty sure you can train to bus also, but certainly if you, but I think even if you train to walk, you beat a bike at this scale from Mitte. So the point is that bikes have a limitation on their range because it's a little bit like the issue with and I keep saying that maybe high-speed trains are the intercity equivalent of urban rail, urban rapid transit, and then maybe comparing them to cars. But you can even make the same argument almost with planes versus trains, where with planes you have these hours of getting to the airport and staying in security and then getting back and then getting from the airport to your destination. But once you do that, the difference between how long it takes you to get between, I don't know, Paris and Nice versus, I don't know, Stockholm and Nice is basically the same amount of time. So here, some people fly, some people take the train. I think it might actually be close to 50-50 or slight majority for flying, and this is a TGV that stops being GV and becomes slow ass past Marseille. This is 5.5 hours by train, but I would train. This nobody trains. And it's kind of the same with mass transit versus bike, and so bikes. Outside, people talking about the Netherlands, which I mean Amsterdam, because that's the place that if you're not from the Netherlands, you most think about usually, or again Copenhagen. It's usually very small places, and it's usually very small. I mean, but European centers aren't perceived as small. But again, the Ghent, Jena maybe. So again, a very university town. Jena, Gera. I think Salzburg has a lot of biking. It's places at kind of that scale, because if it's, so think about it, this place can't be too big, because if it's too big it gets trains. If it's actually rural, people drive. So often it's something you do for school, because why does a city the scale of Vienna even exist? I mean, the obvious answer is history, but I mean, there are lots of historical cities in Germany, not all of which still matter. And I'm going to, for example, I'm going to point to Chemnitz, but Chemnitz is not the only one. It's just the one that I associate the most with. Here's a city where some people actually vote for AfD. And so often it's anchored by something that did not suburbanize. If it's anchored by a shopping mall, yeah, the shopping mall is gonna go near the motorway. or if it's a factory town. So a place like Wolfsburg, right? It's a factory town. So the factories are just not very bike friendly. They're way too spread out. Um, they're very auto friendly that way. There's never kind of a core that you can walk around. I mean, you can walk inside. And I mean, obviously, you can look at the town here on the town side of the station, and that is walkable. But it's not. But the kind of the heart of the town would be the factory. It would be the VW factory, and that is something that's often not going to be a very bike friendly thing, and often. If you expand the factory, then yeah, you look something from here. But if you try to build another factory, why would you build it here? So often a lot of other functions are not going to be within walking distance, and you're going to get a more sprawled out area. And then in a university town, it's completely different because the university kind of forces you to walk because there are a lot of maybe different buildings that you would use. Now this is especially now bear in mind that I'm constantly hovering over Europe. Now the American university is the simplest way to explain the concept of the campus because American universities are modular. You pick your own courses. So the way it works at an American university is that you need to have to fulfill. So it's usually 40 courses if this is a semester system. You take 5 at a time, and there are 2 semesters, 4 years. 5 times 2 times 4 is 40. Now there are exceptions, like there are weird project-based things or some trimester systems, but what I'm saying is the standard. And you essentially pick your own courses. Now there are prereq chains. If you've played RPG, if you've gone to an American Union, you know what I'm talking about. If you have not and for some reason have not heard of them, of how American unions work, it's like maybe skills in an RPG that have long chains of prerequisites or feats that have prerequisites. So you construct a path that lets you take the classes you need. You need to have a field of study, your major, which will have requirements. Let's say if it's a math major, they will require a certain number of math courses. They will make specific lists of math courses that you need to take, and then say, okay, and the rest you need to take an extra this number of math courses of this level. Then maybe the uni will have something called a core requirement or distribution requirements, where let's say you're studying math, and they will say, okay, so you need to, and again, this depends on the American uni. This depends on, so you need to take this number of, math is a science, so you need to take this number of humanities courses, and then the uni start differing on how much restriction subject comes. So where I went for grad school, Columbia, there's an actual course. There are courses that all the undergrads have to take, like the kind of Western canon or something. And maybe other unis are more flexible. They say, oh, okay, you just need to pick a history course any kind and take that, or pick a literature course any kind and take that. So and beyond that, you just take whatever you want. And and for example, Singapore is like that as well. Singapore is an American style modular system. So the point is that you need to go between different campuses because the classrooms will not all be in one building. So they need to be in a lot of different buildings. And yeah, you can maybe set things up so that the science buildings are near each other or the humanities buildings are near each other, but people still need to travel between them. So this leads toward a campus. Now the campus can be annoyingly enclosed or it can be open. This mostly depends on whether central admin at the university hates the city. So at Columbia it does. In fact, the person who made the decision at Columbia to kind of segregate the campus, not racially there, I don't think the area was I think the area was working class white and never actually had an influx of black people or something. At the time, the person who made the decision, however, to lift the campus and reduce its access to the outside world was Eisenhower. He was the president of the university before he became president of the United States. And yes, I am accusing him of being anti-urban. Yeah, he was. And then maybe traditional NYU was maybe more the campuses, the city, or the campuses, the neighborhoods of the buildings. So there are a bunch of buildings, and you just walk on normal city streets to get between them. Except now the buildings at NYU have a lot of access control, which is something that always complicates things whenever we try to do public events. Now, again, the European university is not as modular. You often pick your field of study when you come in. The class times are often, like, you have a program, like if you have a specific, let's say, chemical engineering program, there are courses that you need to take, you have an entire list of courses you need to take for that. And so, for example, the math course is not going to be one math course that's general and everyone's going to take that math course if they need a math course to graduate, if they want to, but it's going to be math for chemical engineering. That was something that I noticed when I was in Sweden, and when I was at KTH in Stockholm. But anyway, the point, but even in such a place, even at KTH is an extraordinarily non-modular example from what I've seen. No, it is completely false that they have no campus. They have campuses. I mean, sure, you need to walk on city streets to get between different buildings, but that's just called being a normal urban uni. Even universities that you absolutely think of as having campuses, like Harvard and MIT or Yale, yeah, you walk on city streets in New Haven to get between Yale buildings. Supreme Court said what? Said what? That they have no campus? The city is the campus? Oh, because they were trying to pass a law, because I guess NYU was trying to restrict people from carrying guns on campus, and if it's on city streets and the NYU can't restrict them, yeah, their problem. No, that's not NYU has no campus. That's NYU has a campus, but you need to walk you need to walk on public streets between buildings, and the public streets are subject to New York law and American law, not the private law of NYU. If you are that concerned, change the goddamn law. Okay, this is actually really interesting to me because certainly in Singapore I took the classes in many buildings, even classes in the same department often. Connor, when you say this was during Fayetteville, Arkansas 15 years ago, I kind of like the justification of Fayetteville AR-15. Especially when people talk about American gun control, my absolute least favorite issue to discuss because of how unimportant it is relative to how Americans care about it. But anyway, so KTH has a campus. The campus is roughly this. I'm pretty sure these are still public streets. It's not enclosed. There's no access control because I want to say Swedes are not insane, but I've just seen the government they elected, so debatable. But so the buildings are still next to each other because the chemical engineers who take math courses are not all going to take them in one building, and even if they did, the math professors would need to get there. So universities, my point is, are very well suited to all being in one place. This place has to be pretty central. Now, yeah, the place can sometimes be suburbanized. It's very rare, but it does exist. And while we're on the subject of Sweden, I'm going to show you a uni where it did happen, which is Linnaeus University in Växjö. The university is specifically not here. Normally, this is where you would expect a uni to be, an urban uni to be, and this is not the Europe versus the United States thing. Usually when I think of a small town with a center that looks like this, my first thought is New Haven, and Yale absolutely is, like, essentially just rings, it rings the green, essentially. I think on 3 sides, and then the 4th side is normie retail, and then behind it is the hospital. I will not remember where the uni is. I think it's here, but I need to actually check this. Yeah, here. So it was a bus ride to get here. Um, and I remember this because I'm pretty sure this was because the trip from, because when I visited, the trips between my hotel and city center and the uni, or the train station and the uni, were pretty sure the only time in my 2 years in Sweden in which I rode a bus in Sweden. Um, and so this is very amenable for cycling. Again, the fact that it's outside city center makes it more amenable to driving. The person who invited me, the professor there who invited me, drove. Uh, but this is an unusual case of suburbanization of campus by European standards. And again, I'm talking a lot about Europe, but this is the association of campus with the kind of more intact city center is not a purely European thing. I'm literally giving you constant American examples. I'm still more familiar with American than European academia, so I can show you New Haven, I can show you Brown. If anything, Brown's kind of weird in that Brown is off of city, is not on city center, but near city center, because this is actually the oldest part of the city. Providence was settled from here, and this is the second neighborhood that was settled, Center City. This later became more central because the industry the industry could not be here because the industry needed water power. This was early 19th century. And so the industry moved to where the falls of the rivers were, which was generally going west and upriver. And so essentially the industry ended up around here. So not Center City, Down City developed here as the main city center. And Brown stayed here as the older part of the city. Still dense, still walkable. And of course, while we're at bypassed Stark City Center, I cannot not mention Cambridge. This is the oldest part of Cambridge. Harvard is literally where Cambridge started. They named the city Cambridge because the people who founded Harvard or something had gone to Cambridge. But this is absolutely not city center. It's kind of weird. Harvard is the biggest employer in Cambridge, but there's a very obvious city center to Cambridge. It is not Harvard. At one point it was Central Square maybe, but it has moved closer to Boston because of the growth of tech industries that are near MIT. MIT, Kendall Square, so actual center. But even then, Harvard, Harvard is bikeable. Harvard's also walkable. And of course, people don't bike here. Why? First of all, American bike infrastructure sucks. And this is something where I'm going to cite a Swiss professor who, I'm pretty sure it was not some weird confidential thing, so I'm going to probably give enough information that you can de-anonymize the Swiss professor if you really want. It's a Swiss math professor who had been visiting Ann Arbor, Michigan, UMich, I'm guessing for a year on sabbatical. And now, this is a pretty central campus, so actual center campus right next to it, pretty normal. And this professor did what is normal for a European professor to do, which is to bike to campus. And of course, in Europe, you maybe politicize bikes and you think, I live here. I just don't bike. But we here think of bikes as a mainly left-wing thing. Often people bike as a kind of statement of left-wing values. They don't as a statement of right-wing values. Again, it's not completely the case. There's counter-signaling, there's just good or bad transportation, but it is the thing. So this professor knows that Ann Arbor is a very left-wing place, and then not only are they the only person at the department who bikes, but everyone else looks at them weird because they biked. Because you're supposed to do it if you're a student, not a professor. Now, I will say that the bike infrastructure on these arterial roads in Ann Arbor is scary as fuck, and I'm not going to bemoan professors for not doing it. It is pretty scary, and the retail options are often not going to be very good if you stick to bikes. The retail, this is maybe an American thing where the retail is big box stores. I live in Germany. We have Kaufland. Kaufland usually has parking, but Kaufland is often still walkable. In the cities in the United States, the big box stores are specifically not walkable, even in places that are supposed to be transit-oriented development. The places where you get groceries for prices that aren't going to make you throw things, or rather, sorry, let me clarify. At prices that aren't going to make you throw things at the wall at how terrible your situation is, as opposed to not throw things because you're spending so much money on groceries, you will just finish them and not throw them even if they don't taste good. So I don't mean that. I mean at reasonable prices. These are big box stores, not urban groceries. Urban groceries that are designed to be walkable in America are horrifically expensive, often run by people who think that it's immoral to buy at a chain. So your retail options are just gonna suck if you're on a bike. I mean, yeah, you can still bike to the interstate exit where Walmart is or something, or Target or Costco, but why would you? It's not gonna be safe. You're gonna get run over, eventually. So the bike urbanism is often that you need to actually have bike facilities. You need to think how they interact with other needs. So I said at the beginning, like half an hour ago, I said that school trips, and I'm talking about unis, but it's also true of school that's not uni, primary and secondary school, are often a very good thing for bikes because it's usually things that are forced to be dense and walkable at the campus. And so it's good for bikes because usually if a street is walkable, it's also bikeable and vice versa. Not entirely, it's not always the case. I mean, I keep giving counter examples like Singapore, although I will say that places in Singapore that are not good bike for cycling are also not great for walking because there are sidewalks, but go try crossing the street. Go. And so it's often walkable also means bikeable, and that makes the uni more attractive. It's centralized in the sense of not having a very long range of how far I need to cycle. Often the amenities will cluster near the university anyway. Students often don't have money for cars anyway, so once amenities serving students are within walking distance, even students who can afford a car will stick to them, is often a thing. And of course with factories it's not like this. Factory workers are often not poor. I mean, factory workers were poor 100 years ago. It's not 100 years ago anymore. And so so university towns are very good. Again, they can't be too big because Paris is again a big university town, but you take the metro, you take the so it needs to be, I don't know, maybe the Leipzig or something, or the Dresden, the TU Dresden, or again the Jenas, the Ghents, and that's actually very good bike urbanism. Often it's small enough that you can actually bike around the entire town, and then if you do cheap groceries, yeah, maybe you'll do it at the edge of town, but it's an edge of town that people can still bike to, and that's fine. Or it could be in city center. I mean, Aldi is everywhere. I have no idea if the Netherlands has anything like that, but Germany and France, yeah. Yeah, that's not just... Okay, so we'll say about the corner stores, that's not cars. I mean, Berlin has the same thing. The Spätis are a lot more expensive and have way worse selection. It's just that we have good urban supermarkets, and then in New York, the bodegas are a lot better than the Berlin Späti. For example, they will make you decent hot food, but they're still expensive. And the supermarkets in New York are horrifically expensive. I mean, easily 3 times the prices that you see at a Lidl or an Aldi. And so, again, this is part of some things are America versus Europe, but the part where bike trips are especially good for school and for uni, that's not in America versus Europe. It's something that I see that could happen in the United States. I don't know to what extent Boulder, Colorado, for example, is much of a biking city. I think Cambridge, Massachusetts has maybe one of the highest bike model splits in America. Like, I think it's Portland, Cambridge, forgetting where else. Never mind the Upper East Side. The Upper East Side is wealthy. I look at the prices you pay in Harlem. They're still horrible. Uh, yeah, this is another problem because so often what happens. So I keep talking about the in-betweenness of, let's say, planes for trips of, let's say, 1,500 or 1,000 or 1.5 thousand kilometers, where planes are really good on these in the intermediate thickness, because if it's too thin, you're not going to have a direct flight, and often often the indirect flight is worse than the indirect train. And if it's too thick a market, then there will be a train. And then if so, you need something in the middle. And often for bike towns, it's kind of the same. So you need to have a city. You need to have a land. You need to have a Jena. Jena is not a big city. Jena is not at all a big city. But Jena is a city. And again, Ghent, Groningen, I'm not able to pronounce that. Groningen. Same thing. Groningen is actually a very often used example of how one bikes in the peripheral area. I know people in Israel are looking at Groningen because Groningen is poor. Amsterdam is rich, Utrecht is rich, but Groningen is not. The northern part of the Netherlands is rather poor. So they look at like how a place that doesn't have money sets this up. For example, Beersheva in Israel has been looking at Groningen as a model. It's kind of funny how you do it when you actually try to do it. When you actually try to be serious about cycling, that Beersheva, which is in the fucking desert, is looking at Groningen. You can do it in Oxford or Cambridge, by the way. So when I'm saying a city, don't be snooty. Don't think that like civilization ends at the Channel. It doesn't. Again, in the United States, I'm giving you examples that could be bike friendly, like Providence, New Haven, Ann Arbor. But yeah, there are places that are just way not urban enough. Way too not urban. So I'm actually kind of curious where you go, if you don't mind telling me. If you do, that's fine. But for example, Bard College, like Simon's Rock, is supposed to be the most not urban thing ever. So especially again, I'm talking about things that are and are not US-Europe differences. Here's the US-Europe difference. Almost every European university, almost every European urban university is larger than almost all American universities. Like the number of students at Aachen or something. Oh, U Vermont. Oh, okay, no, City College is like an urban campus, but so let's look at University of Aachen or Aachen University. I don't know which appellation they do. I'm sure I'll get redirected. Aachen, okay, Aachen University. Students, 47,000. That exists in the United States, but it's very rare. It exists in Canada, by the way. Canadian universities are kind of infamously huge. So at a place like, so I was thinking of Simon's Rock, but which is I think Great Barrington. I mean, Great Barrington is not a city. This is Great Barrington. And Simon's Rock somehow manages to not even be in the center of that. Yeah. I guess you cloister the 16 and 17-year-olds so that they don't go to the great metropolis of Great Barrington and its corrupting influence or something. And yeah, but even, no, Burlington I will say is a city, but, I mean, not a large city, but a city. With a very famous mayor. Right? Someone who was mayor 50 years ago, but mayor. Actually, let me check. Where did you say you're going? University of Vermont. Burlington. That's okay. That's not city center, but it's still city. It's just that it is kind of isolated. I'm seeing the elevation. Worcester has the same problem, by the way. Worcester, Massachusetts. New Haven is very city center. Yeah, Yale's literally defines city center. Brown is not, but it's sufficiently urban that it's fine. I think in Boston, it's nearly all the Boston unis. Tufts. Maybe not Brandis. Brandis is the one that's on the hill, but Tufts is fine. Northeastern, BU, not sure about BC, certainly MIT and Harvard. UMass, Boston is a kind of weird one. Um, and yeah, this is just kind of too far, I guess, because the city center would be here. So if it were like quite a more proper university center, it would be here. By the way, it's something. Often it's a choice. Often it's a choice to like move to a very non-urban location, and it's also true of schools, which is definitely a thing that's important. Talk about making schools more accessible by not cars, because school children don't drive. Um, Ideally, and by ideally I don't mean, oh, you should not let them, it's bad to give 16-year-old driver licenses. No, what I mean is, as a matter of actual practice, 12-year-olds don't have driving licenses. If they drive, then something is going deeply wrong. Bear in mind, Athens, Georgia, campuses aren't here, so I mean, you can walk to campus. You don't want to walk to campus because then you're in Georgia, and I was there in, I think, May, and it was already horrifically hot in late May. But you can do it. And it's, again, often it's just a choice of where you place your campus relative to the city. Interesting, because certainly Bernie Sanders, when he was mayor, was famously not at all an NIMBY. He was actually rather developmental. But anyway, I did say that 9:30 is almost a hard stop, and people should yell at me if I'm still doing this at 9:45, and we're kind of running out of steam, talking about something that's kind of different from bike urbanism, which again is limited in size. It can't be too small. Simon's Rock, forget about it. Burlington, doable, but they need to move the campus closer to city center. Something bigger, definitely. And then transit is much bigger. The Viennas, the Parises, the Londons, the Madrids. Do people have quick questions? Oh yeah, that's definitely a thing. Like you often want to do a thing where the amenities surfing campus are not just surfing campus. So for example, New Haven, which is among the cities I've not lived in. No, it's not the one most familiar to me. Boston is the most familiar to me, but New Haven is number 2. New Haven constantly reminds you of like Yale-related cultural amenities that you should visit. So, for example, museums that are often for serving the Yale community, but then you could just go to do these museums as a tourist who's just visiting New Haven, or the theater, or I think at one point they were running. I don't remember where they were running, where Paul Giamatti was playing. I think there was something Shakespeare where Paul Giamatti was playing a character. And I don't mean Paul Giamatti when he was in Honor. I mean Paul Giamatti, I think, 15 years ago. So you definitely need something that's not cloistered, if that makes sense, for campus. I think cloister is probably the best way to describe it, given the origin of Western universities, but you definitely need the amenities to be dual use. So both uni and people who are not uni. Yeah, that's just bad. That's just, don't do it. Please don't do it. And this is often perilous because often the sort of people who are attracted to the uni tend to be horrifically NIMBY. So it's something that's hard to develop if you don't already have it. I mean, in Cambridge or in Harvard, the locals are literally trying to micromanage what restaurants what kind of restaurants, what kind of fast food is even allowed to open at Harvard Square, because I guess they have free time. So they have opinions about, does the area have too many pizzerias? Actual NIMBY fight that happened sometime last decade. And if you're trying to overrule the NIMBYs, you're overruling them by using people who care about housing affordability writ large, and not about the availability of wide retail options for people in New Haven. So yeah. Actual thing that Cambridge NIMBYs said about I think a pizzeria that wanted to open at Harvard Square. So anyway, I do need to go. Thank you all for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, it's already been uploaded. If you're watching on Twitch, yeah, I'll upload. I don't know what I'm going to talk about on Saturday. We'll figure it out. Okay, this temporarily makes me not hate Jersey, and do you know how difficult it gets me? Do you know how difficult it is for me not to hate Jersey? Um, Especially the NIMBY stuff. Jersey might be the least NIMBY northeastern state. Um, if you've managed to read my most recent blog post, the one that I uploaded shortly before I started streaming, Germany is the NIMBYest, essentially the NIMBYest European country or something like that. And Jersey is, I guess, the least NIMBY northeastern state. But anyway, yeah. Ciao, ciao. Before I ramble, I hope to see you on Saturday. I might cancel. I'm not sure. We will see. I always talk about stream happening or not happening on Discord, Mastodon, Twitter with topic. So anyway, thank you all, and ciao, ciao.